She's just IT support, Sergeant Miller laughed, watching the petite brunette crawl under the server rack with her toolkit. Probably learned everything from YouTube videos. The other technicians snickered as 24-year-old specialist Sarah Chen methodically traced Ethernet cables in the dimly lit Network Operations Center. But when FOB Thunder's entire communication grid crashed at 0347 hours, cutting off a high-priority extraction team deep in hostile territory, Sarah had exactly 39 minutes to restore contact before 6 Rangers would be stranded without backup. What she found buried in the corrupted server logs wasn't just a system failure. It was a deliberate sabotage pattern that could only come from someone with administrative access, someone inside the base, someone who knew exactly when that extraction team would be most vulnerable. Before we dive in, what's the most underestimated job you think deserves more respect? Drop your answer below. If you believe expertise comes in unexpected packages, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories. If you believe no woman should be underestimated because of her technical skills, type respect below. The server room of forward operating base Thunder hummed with the constant white noise of cooling fans and processing units. Rows of black metal towers lined the walls, their LED indicators blinking like electronic constellations in the semi-darkness. Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor, her small frame almost disappearing between the massive server cabinets. Her toolkit was different from the standard-issue equipment the other IT technicians carried. While theirs contained basic diagnostic tools and replacement parts, Sarah's black canvas bag held something that caught the light differently in the dim room, a custom-built network analyzer with military-grade encryption capabilities. The device was about the size of a smartphone but thick as a brick, with a matte black surface that seemed to absorb light. She ran her fingers over its surface, checking the encrypted data logs from the previous night's network traffic. The analyzer had been recording unusual patterns for 3 days, patterns that made her stomach tighten with unease. Anomalous access attempts at precisely 0300 hours, administrative overrides from terminals that should have been secured, and data packets routing through servers that weren't supposed to handle classified communications. But every time she tried to explain her findings to the senior staff, they dismissed her with the same patronizing smile. "Chen, you're great at fixing printers and resetting passwords, but leave the network security to the professionals." Sergeant Miller had said that exact phrase twice this week, each time making the other technicians chuckle. Sarah glanced at the duty roster posted on the wall. Tonight was Operation Nightfall, a high-priority extraction mission to pull out an intelligence asset from deep in hostile territory. 6 Rangers would be relying on continuous communication with base command to navigate through enemy positions and coordinate air support. She looked at her analyzer again. The pattern was there, clear as day to anyone who understood network forensics. Someone was systematically compromising their communication infrastructure, and they had timed it perfectly for tonight's mission. Senior technician Miguel Rodriguez had been watching Sarah Chen for weeks, and he was starting to think the Army had wasted her talents. While other specialists her age were still learning basic network troubleshooting, Sarah could diagnose complex system failures in minutes. She had an intuitive understanding of data flow that he'd only seen in senior analysts with decades of experience, but there was something else about her, something that made the other guys uncomfortable. She asked questions that went beyond her pay grade. She noticed patterns in network traffic that most technicians wouldn't even think to look for. And her toolkit contained equipment that definitely wasn't standard issue. Equipment that suggested she understood network security at a level that made some people nervous. Rodriguez remembered the conversation he'd overheard between Sergeant Miller and Lieutenant Brooks last month. "The Chen girl is getting too curious about classified systems," Miller had said. "Maybe we should rotate her to general IT support, keep her busy with password resets and equipment maintenance." But Rodriguez knew better. 3 months ago, Sarah had prevented a potentially catastrophic security breach by noticing that someone was accessing personnel files from an unauthorized terminal. She'd traced the intrusion back to a compromised admin account and implemented countermeasures before any sensitive data was stolen. When she tried to file a formal report, It disappeared into bureaucratic limbo. Miller claimed there was insufficient evidence of actual wrongdoing. The night shift in the server room was different, quieter. Sarah preferred working when fewer people were around to question her methods or dismiss her findings. She had learned to keep her real work hidden, the deep network analysis, the traffic pattern recognition, the security protocols that went far beyond her official job description. What her colleagues didn't know was that Sarah Chen had graduated at the top of her class from the Army's Advanced Cybersecurity Program. She had requested assignment to FOB Thunder specifically because intelligence suggested this base was a potential target for sophisticated cyber attacks. Her IT support role was perfect cover for monitoring network security without drawing attention. The problem was she was finding evidence of threats faster than the official channels could process them. And tonight, with Operation Nightfall launching in less than 4 hours, she had run out of time for proper procedure. At exactly 0347 hours, every communication system in FOB Thunder went dark. The main operations center erupted in controlled chaos as staff officers frantically tried to re-establish contact with command. Radio operators cycled through emergency frequencies, finding nothing but static. Network administrators rebooted servers and checked physical connections, their movements becoming increasingly desperate. And 6 Rangers, call sign Nightfall Team, were 20 minutes into hostile territory with no way to call for backup. Sarah was in the server room when the crash hit. Her analyzer immediately lit up with alerts, not random system failures, but a coordinated attack designed to look like cascading hardware problems. Someone had used administrative access to corrupt critical communication protocols while simultaneously overloading network switches to create the appearance of equipment failure. She sprinted toward the operations center, her analyzer clutched in her hand, but Sergeant Miller blocked her path in the corridor. "Chen, get back to your station and run basic diagnostics on the server farm," he ordered, not even looking at her screen. "This is a command-level emergency. We need real network specialists handling this." "Sergeant, I've been tracking the attack pattern for 3 days," Sarah said, holding up her analyzer. "This isn't equipment failure. Someone's been systematically compromising our—" "Did I stutter?" Miller's voice turned sharp. "Your IT support, not network security. Go reset some passwords and let the qualified personnel handle this." Behind Miller, she could see Lieutenant Brooks coordinating with senior technicians who were completely focused on hardware troubleshooting. They were wasting precious minutes checking physical connections and rebooting systems that had been deliberately corrupted through software. Sarah's training told her to follow orders and return to her station. But her analyzer was showing her exactly how the attack had been executed, and more importantly, how to reverse it. The Rangers in the field had maybe 15 minutes before they reached the extraction point. Without communication, they would be walking blind into a potential ambush. "Sergeant," she tried once more, "the Nightfall Team is going to—" "That's enough!" Miller's face flushed red. "You're out of line, Specialist. Report to your station immediately, or I'll have you written up for insubordination." Behind them, a radio operator called out desperately, "Still no contact with Nightfall Team?" They should have reached Checkpoint Alpha 2 minutes ago. Sarah looked at her analyzer, then at Miller's dismissive scowl, then at the chaos of the operations center where qualified personnel were failing to solve a problem she understood perfectly. She made her choice. Operation Nightfall had been 3 weeks in the planning. Intelligence had identified a high-value asset, a local informant who had provided crucial information about enemy supply routes, who needed immediate extraction. The informant's cover had been blown, and enemy forces were closing in on his location. The mission required surgical precision. 6 Rangers would infiltrate enemy territory using night vision and stealth tactics, locate the asset at a remote compound, and extract him to a predetermined helicopter landing zone. The entire operation depended on constant communication with Base Command for real-time intelligence updates and air support coordination. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera led the team, an experienced Ranger with 4 combat deployments and a reputation for bringing everyone home. But even Rivera's expertise couldn't overcome the fundamental problem of operating blind in hostile territory. What Sarah understood and what the senior staff didn't want to acknowledge was that this communication failure wasn't random. Someone with inside knowledge had timed the cyber attack to coincide with Nightfall Team's most vulnerable moment, when they would be too far from base to turn back, but not yet at the extraction point. Her analyzer showed the attack signature clearly. Administrative access had been used to corrupt specific communication protocols while leaving basic network infrastructure intact. It was elegant, sophisticated, and designed to be misdiagnosed as equipment failure rather than sabotage. The corruption pattern told a story. First, the attacker had gained access to network routing tables, redirecting communication traffic through servers that could be easily overloaded. Then, they had systematically corrupted the encryption keys that allowed secure communication between field units and base command. Finally, they had triggered cascade failures in backup systems to ensure the outage would last long enough to compromise the mission. But there was something else in the data, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. The attack wasn't just designed to disrupt communication. The timing and targeting suggested the attacker knew specific details about Operation Nightfall, including the team's route and extraction timeline. Someone inside Fob Thunder was actively sabotaging missions and putting Rangers' lives at risk. Rodriguez watched Sarah walk away from Sergeant Miller, but she didn't head toward her assigned station. Instead, she disappeared into the maze of server racks in the back of the facility. Something about her posture, the determined set of her shoulders, the way she gripped her analyzer, told him she wasn't planning to follow orders. He followed her quietly, staying in the shadows between equipment rows. Sarah had positioned herself at Terminal 7, one of the few direct access points to the core network infrastructure. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, entering commands that Rodriguez recognized as advanced network forensics protocols. What Rodriguez saw on her screen made him step closer. Sarah wasn't just running basic diagnostics. She was performing real-time network forensics, tracing the attack vectors through multiple system layers. Her analyzer was feeding her data that the base's standard monitoring systems couldn't even detect. She paused suddenly, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The screen showed a directory structure that Rodriguez didn't recognize. Administrative folders that required clearance levels above Sarah's pay grade. But she was accessing them as if she had legitimate authorization. "How are you doing that?" Rodriguez whispered, stepping out of the shadows. Sarah didn't look surprised to see him. "The attack came from inside our own network," she said quietly, pointing to her screen. Someone with administrative access corrupted the communication protocols deliberately. They knew about Operation Nightfall. Rodriguez studied the data. Even with his limited network security training, he could see the patterns Sarah was highlighting. "You need to take this to Lieutenant Brooks." "I tried. Sergeant Miller won't let me near the operations center." Sarah's voice carried frustration and desperation. "Rodriguez, the Nightfall team has been dark for 8 minutes. At their current pace, they'll reach the extraction point in 7 more minutes. If they can't call for air support, they'll be sitting ducks," Rodriguez finished. Sarah turned back to her keyboard. "I can reverse the attack. I know exactly what was corrupted and how to fix it. But I need someone to buy me time." The fix required accessing 3 different server systems and restoring communication protocols in a specific sequence. If she tried to do it through official channels, the paperwork alone would take longer than the Rangers had. If she did it without authorization, she'd be facing court-martial for accessing classified systems. But Staff Sergeant Rivera and his team were counting on base command for survival. In hostile territory without communication, they were operating completely blind. Sarah's fingers moved to the keyboard. Protocol demanded she follow the chain of command. Training demanded she wait for proper authorization, but her conscience demanded she save 6 Rangers who were running out of time. "Rodriguez," she said quietly, "in 30 seconds, Sergeant Miller is going to realize I'm not at my assigned station. Can you handle that conversation?" Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Do what you need to do, Chen. I'll keep them busy." Staff Sergeant Rivera crouched behind a rocky outcrop, his night vision goggles showing the compound 200 meters ahead. The extraction point was a small building where their asset was supposed to be waiting, But without communication with base command, Rivera had no way to confirm whether the area was secure. His radio produced nothing but static on all frequencies. Standard protocol was to abort the mission and return to base if communication couldn't be re-established, but they were already 40 minutes into hostile territory. Turning back now would mean abandoning their asset to certain death. "Sarge," whispered Corporal Jenkins, the team's communications specialist. "I've tried every frequency, including emergency bands. We're completely dark." Rivera studied the compound through his scope. No visible movement, but that didn't mean anything. Enemy forces could be waiting inside, or worse, the asset could already be compromised. Without real-time intelligence from base command, every decision was pure guesswork. Meanwhile, Sarah's screen showed 3 separate attack vectors that needed to be neutralized simultaneously. The saboteur had been clever, corrupting the systems in a sequence that would make restoration nearly impossible through normal administrative channels. But her analyzer had traced the exact sequence of the attack, which meant she could reverse it. First, she needed to restore the encryption key databases that secured communication between field units and base command. The keys had been systematically corrupted, but the backup files were still intact in a hidden directory that required forensic-level access to locate. Second, she needed to clear the routing table corruptions that were directing communication traffic through overloaded servers. This required administrative access to the core network infrastructure, access that was supposed to be restricted to officers with security clearances far above her level. Third, she needed to restart the communication protocols in a specific sequence to prevent cascade failures in the backup systems. The problem was timing. Each step had to be completed in perfect sequence, and any delay would trigger automatic security lockouts that would require senior officer authorization to bypass. Sarah had one chance to get it right. From the corridor outside, she could hear Rodriguez's voice getting louder as he engaged Sergeant Miller in conversation about server maintenance schedules. The distraction wouldn't last long. Sarah's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. What she was about to do would definitely violate several regulations about unauthorized access to classified systems. If she was wrong about the attack, or if she made any mistakes in the restoration sequence, she could make the communication outage even worse. But her analyzer was showing her something else, new network traffic that suggested the attacker was still active, monitoring the system to ensure the sabotage remained effective. Someone inside their own base was actively working to keep the Rangers cut off from support. She started typing. Sarah's first keystroke triggered an immediate response from her analyzer. The device lit up with alerts showing active network monitoring from an unauthorized terminal. Someone was watching the communication systems in real time, tracking the restoration attempts. Her blood ran cold. The saboteur was online right now, ready to counter any fix she implemented. But her analyzer gave her an advantage the attacker didn't know about. While they could monitor standard network activity, her device was tracking data at a forensic level that bypassed normal system monitoring. She could work invisibly, at least for a few minutes. Sarah opened a command window and began the restoration sequence. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision, entering network commands that required years of specialized training to understand. The first step, restoring encryption keys, completed successfully. Her screen showed communication channels beginning to clear. Then her analyzer screamed an alert. The saboteur had detected the restoration and was actively trying to re-corrupt the systems faster than she could fix them. Sarah realized she was in a real-time cyber battle with the saboteur. Every system she restored, they tried to corrupt again. She needed to work faster than humanly possible, unless she could identify the attacker's terminal and cut off their access. Her analyzer showed the source, Terminal 3 in the Operations Center. Someone with administrative access was sitting right in the middle of the crisis response team, actively sabotaging their efforts while appearing to help. Sarah made a split-second decision. Instead of just restoring communication, she would trace the saboteur's digital fingerprints and expose them. Lieutenant Brooks watched his senior technicians work frantically to restore communication with the Nightfall team. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was sitting at Terminal 3, actively corrupting every repair they attempted while maintaining the perfect appearance of a concerned officer trying to help. The operation had been planned for months. Enemy forces had paid him well for the intelligence about Nightfall Team's route and timing. The communication sabotage was just insurance to ensure the Rangers walked into the trap without any possibility of calling for air support. But something was wrong. His monitoring software was showing restoration attempts that didn't correspond to any of the official repair work happening around him. Someone else was in the system, working at a level of sophistication that his contacts hadn't warned him about. Brooks tried to counter the mysterious restoration attempts, but whoever was working against him understood network security at an expert level. They were restoring systems faster than he could corrupt them, and worse, they seemed to be tracing his digital signature. His secure phone buzzed. A text message. Abort. Extraction compromised. Eliminate evidence. Sarah's screen showed the saboteur's location clearly now. Terminal 3, operated by Lieutenant Brooks. But her analyzer also showed something terrifying. Brooks was actively deleting files and covering his digital tracks. He knew he'd been discovered. She completed the final restoration sequence just as her analyzer detected Brooks logging out of his terminal. Communication channels flared back to life throughout the base, but Sarah realized she was now the only person who had direct evidence of Brooks's sabotage. Her secure phone, standard issue for IT specialists with network access, buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed LT Brooks. Sarah stared at the phone, her heart hammering. If she answered, Brooks would know she had detected him. If she didn't answer, he might realize she was the one who had restored communication and traced his sabotage. She answered. Specialist Chen, Brooks's voice was calm, professional. Report to my office immediately. We need to discuss some irregularities in network access logs. The line went dead. Sarah looked at her analyzer one more time. The evidence was all there. Months of unauthorized access, systematic sabotage of military operations, and tonight's deliberate attack on the Nightfall Team's communication. But Brooks had administrative authority to confiscate her equipment and delete her findings. Base Command, this is Nightfall 6. Rivera's voice crackled through the radio with overwhelming relief. We have communication restored. Request immediate status update on extraction zone security. The operations center erupted in cheers as communication channels came back online throughout the facility. Staff officers immediately began coordinating air support and providing real-time intelligence to the Rangers in the field. But Rivera's next transmission made everyone freeze. Base Command, we have eyes on the extraction point. Multiple hostile positions surrounding the compound. Looks like an ambush setup. How did they know our exact location and timing? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah watched from the server room as Lieutenant Brooks slowly stood up from Terminal 3, his face pale under the operations center's fluorescent lights. Their eyes met across the distance, and Brooks gave her a slight nod, not of greeting, but of acknowledgement. He knew she had figured it out. Colonel Matthews, the base commander, had been monitoring the situation from his office. When communication was restored and Rivera reported the ambush setup, Matthews immediately ordered a security lockdown. No one would leave the base until they determined how enemy forces had obtained detailed intelligence about a classified operation. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of reporting to Brooks's office, she walked directly to Colonel Matthews's quarters, her analyzer clutched in her hands like evidence in a trial. Sir, she said to the surprised colonel, I need to show you something that can't wait for the chain of command. 20 minutes later, Colonel Matthews had seen enough. The analyzer's data told a clear story of systematic sabotage, unauthorized access to classified systems, and tonight's deliberate attack on Operation Nightfall. But more importantly, Sarah's real-time tracking had caught Lieutenant Brooks in the act of covering his digital tracks. Specialist Chen, Colonel Matthews said quietly, you understand that what you've shown me means someone in my command structure has been actively betraying our operations? Yes, sir. And I believe they're still trying to cover their tracks. Matthews picked up his secure phone and made a call that Sarah couldn't hear. 5 minutes later, Military police arrived at Lieutenant Brooks's office to find him attempting to destroy computer hard drives with a hammer. The arrest was quiet, professional, and swift. Brooks didn't resist, but as the MPs led him away, he looked directly at Sarah with an expression of pure hatred. "How?" he asked simply. Sarah held up her analyzer. "You corrupted the wrong system, sir. And you forgot that someone might be watching at a level you couldn't detect." The next morning, Colonel Matthews called Sarah to his office again. This time, she wasn't alone. Representatives from Army Cybersecurity Command were present, along with a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Ms. Rodriguez from Intelligence. "Specialist Chen," Colonel Matthews began, "your actions last night prevented a catastrophic mission failure and exposed a security breach that could have compromised operations for months. You also violated approximately 12 regulations regarding unauthorized access to classified systems." Sarah's stomach dropped. She had saved lives and caught a traitor, but she had also broken the rules doing it. "However," Matthews continued, "given the extraordinary circumstances and the results you achieved, those violations will be overlooked. In fact, we have a proposition for you." Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward. "Your cybersecurity skills are far beyond what your current position requires. We'd like to offer you a transfer to a specialized unit where your talents would be properly utilized." "What kind of unit?" Sarah asked. "The kind that doesn't officially exist," Ms. Rodriguez replied with a slight smile. "The kind that prevents problems like Lieutenant Brooks before they become critical threats." Sarah thought about the past 6 months at FOB Thunder, being dismissed, having her expertise questioned, watching security threats develop while bureaucracy prevented action. Then she thought about Staff Sergeant Rivera and his team, who had come home safely because she had refused to follow protocol when lives were at stake. "When do I start?" she asked. 3 weeks later, Specialist Sarah Chen officially transferred to Administrative Support Division at Fort Meade. Her friends at FOB Thunder thought she was processing paperwork for the Pentagon. In reality, she was part of a team that monitored military networks for exactly the kind of threats she had detected at Thunder. Her official title was Network Administrator, but her real job was hunting digital predators who betrayed their own country for money. Her first assignment briefing came with a warning. "The enemies you'll be tracking are often people you work with, people you trust, people who have earned respect and authority. They're betting that no one will suspect them, and that if someone does, they won't have the expertise or the courage to act." Sarah smiled, remembering Sergeant Miller's dismissive laugh. "She's just IT support." "Understood," she replied. "When do we start hunting?" The briefing officer handed her a new analyzer, smaller, more sophisticated, and completely invisible to standard monitoring systems. "You already did." "Welcome to the real cybersecurity war, Chen. These are the battles that never make the news, but they determine who wins the wars that do." As Sarah walked out of the briefing room, she thought about all the people throughout her career who had underestimated her because of her age, her gender, her quiet demeanor, or her technical focus. They had assumed that expertise came with loud voices, aggressive personalities, and impressive ranks. They had been wrong. Some of the most dangerous battles are fought by people who prefer networks to politics, data to drama, and quiet competence to public recognition. And sometimes, the person who saves everyone is the one nobody thought was qualified to try. If you believe that real heroes often work behind the scenes, protecting others without seeking recognition, please hit that like button and subscribe. In the comments below, tell us about a time when someone who seemed ordinary turned out to be extraordinary. These stories matter because they remind us that courage and competence come in all forms, and that the next time someone dismisses the quiet person in the corner, they might be making a fatal mistake.